Special Recognition Award. In the middle you see Paul Walker, director of Green Cross International. He's a recipient of the Right Livelihood Award for his work against chemical weapons. And also recipient of the same award is Alan Ware for his peace work. And we're looking forward to this discussion, and Paul is going to be the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. If I speak with the mic here, can you hear me? Okay, in the room? Yeah, in the back, it's okay? Yeah, it's okay, all right. Huh? It's working. Yeah, I think it is. My name is Paul Walker. I'm delighted to be here. Also very delighted to be with Alan Ware from Basel, Switzerland, and prior to that, New Zealand, right? And then, of course, Ambassador Alexander Clement, who's one of the awardees, the laureates of the. We'll turn it over really to the speaker here, Alexander Clement. And I know Alexander has some remarks taking off on the Bob and Gordon, very good presentation. I was delighted to hear earlier, too. And then we'll open it up for discussion and questions. So I think Alan and I should try to be very brief if we can. I know all of us probably could talk for a few hours, but let's see if we can make it just a few short minutes. I want to start off and just say, when we're talking about nuclear weapons in general, as we heard yesterday, I think from Ambassador Clement, there's both good news and bad news. And we typically hear the bad news all the time, and it tends to be a very tough environment to work in. We've heard our laureates reflect on that, myself included, and all. But let me mention some good news too, just to and these will be just bullet points, kind of, that I don't want to go into in any depth. First of all, there's an enormous reduction in nuclear weapons, strategic and tactical, over the last 50 years, say 40, 50 years. At the height of the Cold War, we had somewhere between 50 and 60,000 nuclear warheads in the world, nuclear bombs. Now we're down to 15, 16,000, something of that nature, depending on how you count. Still a lot, obviously, but I think that's a recognizable major reduction. And these are the arguments, to some extent, I think you'll hear from government officials oftentimes about, don't emphasize all the bad news. We've made great progress in steps towards, Article 6 in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. 2, there's only nine countries with nuclear weapons today. Those are the P5, the permanent 5 on the Security Council, with special privileges and the agreement for them to remain nuclear, at least for a while. Russia, the United States, France, Britain, and China. And then you've got the additional 4 nuclear states. India, Pakistan, North Korea, all recognized. And of course, Israel, with an unrecognized nuclear arsenal. Nuclear testing. We did over 2,000 nuclear tests between the Trinity test in 1945 and the Limited Test Ban Treaty, and then on up through the 90s and into the current period. That's a horrible legacy, and we've all dealt with the fallout from nuclear, particularly atmospheric tests, but also underwater tests and underground tests, all over the world by the nuclear powers. But in the last decade, last couple of decades actually, in fact, there've been very, very few tests, and those have been really in the last decade by North Korea. 3 tests by North Korea in 2006, 9, and 13, I think. Perhaps, and maybe a new one still coming. And prior to that, there were a handful of tests by Pakistan, India, and then the P5 basically stopped testing in the early 90s. So there's been a de facto moratorium on nuclear testing. That's a major, really a major step forward. Progress in arms control and disarmament in general. And I would just cite all the numerous agreements that many of us have worked on over the years, both in and out of government. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, we'll hear about, I think, from Alexander more. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, the New START Agreement, which was one of the major breakthroughs, really, of the Obama administration. The Nuclear Security Summit, the last 4 or 5 years, which is a new summit coming up next March, April. And even the smaller sort of unknown agreements like the CPPNM. Any of you know what CPPNM stands for? It's horrible to try to remember these acronyms, but It's the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials. In the United States, after a long debate, just ratified this agreement in the last couple of months. There's also, I think, widespread recognition of the dangers of nuclear power, its relationship to proliferation, which Bob and Gordon emphasized earlier, and there's also, I would mention, a very remarkable drawdown in nuclear power plants in the world in general, and we can talk about that more if you like. But nuclear power and nuclear power plants, in my mind, is still a legacy, an obsolete legacy of the 20th century in our sort of atoms of peace program from the 1950s. And the good news is, all of these plants, for the most part, are aging and having to close in the next 10 to 25 years. The bad news, now to give you a few bullets, continued nuclear modernization. We can talk about that, whether it's the B-61 bomb, it's the Obama proposal that spends $1 trillion on new nuclear bombers and missiles and submarines. Russians are doing the same, French and the British the same, the Chinese the same. Lack of the P5, the permanent 5 nuclear powers abiding by their Article 6 commitment that was shown earlier in a slide under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Major nuclear accidents. Nobody could have predicted the Chernobyl breakdown, meltdown, the Fukushima accident. I visited Fukushima last year. I'm happy to talk about that more too. There's also, all of us in the field experience ongoing, tremendous, powerful, well-financed lobbying by the nuclear industry, nuclear power industry, the military services, and all of the military services which fly or float or deploy nuclear weapons. It's a tough, and also I mentioned the nuclear laboratories. And then I would also mention lack of ratification. We've had, it's almost impossible to get a treaty ratified in the U.S. Senate today, no matter what it is. If it's protecting the rights of the child, or the Law of the Sea Treaty, or you name it, for the last at least 20 years, this Senate, for the most part, the Republican majority, but also the Democrats bear some blame too, are very reluctant to what they call giving up American or U.S. National sovereignty. Other countries are in the same ballpark as well, but it's very difficult in what we perceive as sort of, very obviously fortuitous and important agreements to get ratified. And the ones I would cite are really the CPPN agreement, just simply a convention on physical protection of nuclear materials that you, Gordon, and Bob talked about earlier. Very important, very good for the current global security. We couldn't get ratified for over a decade. And Law of the Sea Treaty, which I followed actually very closely, is related to a lot of the work we do, although people sometimes don't recognize that. Impossible. Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, limiting or stopping all nuclear tests, was defeated in the Senate in 1999 with a pretty tough vote, far below the 2/3, 67 vote majority. So that continues to be an ongoing burden. What's to be done? I think Alan and Alexander will obviously have much better thoughts on this than I do. We have to continue to do arms control and disarmament. And no matter what we think about abolition, I'm an abolitionist of weapons of mass destruction and war and violence and all the rest. But I still believe and recognize that all these baby steps we take, in arms control and disarmament, are still important and useful to do. Deep cuts, safeguards agreements, multilateral, bilateral, all the rest. Raising public awareness and transparency. I think everything that the Nuclear Free Future Awards program does, many of the other laureate programs around the world, all the work that many of you do in the NGO community, in and out of government, extremely important, more than we all probably recognize from time to time. 3, pursuing international bans. And the example I oftentimes use is the Chemical Weapons Convention. Very few of you probably follow the Chemical Weapons Convention the way I do. I have for a good 20 years because I've been very involved in literally the physical destruction and elimination and cleanup and remediation of 72,000 tons of deadly chemical agents all over the world. But this is a treaty which has been very successful. 192 states parties, everyone but 4 countries now involved in the treaty, and a couple of other limited territories. destruction of 65,000 metric tons of nerve agent around the world in the last 25 years. And it's a level playing field. No special rights for whatever, P5s, or whatever you might call them, the acknowledged, the chemical weapon states. Continuing discussion of humanitarian impacts, and this is where the Norwegian, the Mexican, and the Austrian initiatives, supported by 150 odd other countries around the world, has been extremely important. I think that must continue. Minimizing and eliminating high enriched uranium and plutonium that we heard about earlier, weapons grade material that can be used for bombs, but also in fact not forgetting that really uranium in general and low enriched uranium, which is used in nuclear power plants for the most part, can also be extremely dangerous, as was pointed out earlier, and can also be used if you don't build a bomb, a nuclear bomb, you can use it in a conventional weapon. And I oftentimes say if 911 had happened with a radioactive device as well, or low enriched uranium, and all of downtown Manhattan and Wall Street was radioactive today, which is what would have happened. Even if it was very minimal, almost harmless radiation, it would be uninhabitable today, and the catastrophe would have been much worse. And that's what a lot of us worry about decommissioned nuclear power plants, active power plants, and all the rest. And last point, we all have to recognize, I think, and I continually try to point this out, the holistic nature of all of these challenges. We can't just work on eliminating nuclear weapons. We can't just work on banning uranium mining. We can't just work on, long-term prospects of managing nuclear waste, which is an enormous challenge. We can't just work on limiting carbon emissions to address climate change. We can't just work on rights of women and children, and on and on and on. It's all, in my mind, very interactive, very interrelated, and very involved. We have to work on all the above. So you have to take a holistic approach and realize if you're in the public health field, you have to worry about nuclear weapons, uranium, radiation, all the rest. If you're in the arms control disarmament community, you've got to worry about public health issues. If you're in the environmental stovepipe community, and worried about climate change, you can't overlook all of these issues, the non-proliferation treaty, humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons and the like. It's all interrelated, and we all should build as much solidarity as we can to address these figures. So let me stop, and I'll turn it over to Alan, and